Awesome. Thank you. So also want to recognize Anna in North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. So love to know your role as well. And then also Delia Walls Darby, special education teacher from Hattiesburg Public School. And so Hattiesburg, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but is that Pennsylvania? Taking a guess there, but welcome, Delia. And anyone else? Let's see. Oh, Mississippi, way off. Please forgive me on that. Not Pennsylvania, but Mississippi. Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Awesome to have you on. Anna, instructional coach, and anyone else, love to let us know who you are. Looks like we have Anna O'Connell, we've already said hi to. Benny Hickman, Deborah Ozanich, John Wright, Karen Stein, Leonie Turek, and Gara Cruz. Forgive me if I got your name wrong as well. Yes, Gara, but welcome all. Karen is a school counselor, school psychologist supervisor from Cincinnati, Ohio. Good to have you on. Been a little while since I've had the chili and spaghetti noodles in Cincinnati. True local specialty there. So as we move into this, today's discussion really, it's about the practice. And it's one of my favorite conversations to have around equity, because so often, and I'm 100% guilty of this, we take the conversation of equity into a more of an abstract realm. It's about our beliefs, it's about social constructs. At the end of the day, what matters most to the student is that their actual education is equitable. And sadly, and I've seen this time and time again, I can engage with a group of educators who, from a conversational standpoint or belief standpoint, we're all agreeing on equitable principles. But when it really comes to the application in their classroom, the actual success of the students, the evidence of equity is not always there. So when we talk about equity practice, it's asking that question, what is actually happening in the classroom each day? So beyond leadership, beyond culture, in that day-to-day delivery of the instruction and the support from the teacher, what is actually going on? And so that's the purpose of our exploration today. So for a moment, I would like you to go into the question box and answer this question. So we've used this term a lot in education, best practice. What's a best practice? Let's apply a best practice. Can a best practice be inequitable? Explain why or why not. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to respond in the question box. Can a best practice be inequitable? Explain why or why not. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion around your responses. So I'll give you about 2 minutes to respond in the question box. Okay, I want to share what Karen wrote in. So Karen writes, yes, a best practice could be inequitable if it is not a culturally responsive best practice and is equally applied to or for all students. Great response there, Karen. And to kind of pick this apart, to look at what you're saying, you know, the inequity of this best practice comes in its potential lack of cultural responsiveness. So who is the student? What are they bringing with them to this learning experience? But then especially that part about equally applied to or for all students. So the same strategy, the same practice applied in the same way to all students with the same expectation, which is basically erasing the inherent differences and uniqueness of each student. Thank you for that response. Alexandra writes, sometimes it may happen. I would agree. I mean, sometimes you find it there. Leonie says, possibly. So as you think about this, and I'll share other responses as they come in, you know, a best practice is based on a certain set of research. You know, it's been shown to have impact on students. As we all know, you know, if we really talk about pedagogy, pedagogy is the art and science of teaching. So we're looking at the science side of this, which is here's a particular strategy, here's a particular approach, there's research behind it that shows it has impact, but fundamentally I have to be aware of the context. You know, the context relates to who is the student, what are their immediate needs, what's the background that they're showing up with. And so the context really is the art of that pedagogical argument. And so it's not to say best practices are by nature inequitable, but it's in their implementation and their use in the classroom, which could throw them either direction. Sam writes in and says, depends on use of the term best. Best for whom? Much research has been done in white middle-class schools to determine what works best, but this doesn't always translate into what is best for students of color or students from poverty. But to me, an authentic best practice is one that supports the success of each and every child. And Sam, I really appreciate your use of the word authentic here. You know, and when you think about defining authentic, authenticity is an area that I've been exploring for a while. I haven't written anything formally on it yet, but the ideas and the reflection has percolated for many years now. Authenticity is fundamentally about being present in the moment. And so the use of that particular practice in the moment, is it applied in a way which is present and relevant to the needs of the student? And so an authentic best practice, well, you're taking the research set, but then you're taking that kind of art side, that contextual side of the implementation and thinking at this moment, what does my student need? And then Anna writes in and says, I believe best practices can be applied in inequitable ways. For example, I've been coaching around ELL instruction lately, and best practice in vocabulary instruction is to provide visual as well as written definitions. But if you provide images only certain cultures connect with the topic, you are being inequitable toward ELLs from other cultures, without question. I mean, it's a great response here. I like where you took this in terms of the very specific action that the teacher is taking in the classroom. So I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I live in Salt Lake City now, raising my kids here. Well, in Salt Lake City, we have mountains, we have snow, and we have skiing. Now, interestingly enough, in Salt Lake City School District, it's about 65% students of color, and of those students of color, almost a third of them are fairly recent immigrants or ELL students. And so these are students, most of them coming from Central and South America and from Africa, arriving in Salt Lake, discovering mountains, Rocky Mountains, different from mountains in their home countries, discovering snow, many of them for the first time, but they have no idea what skiing is, nor do they have the resources, the opportunities to go skiing. And so it's when you really get down to the actual understanding of the student, making sure it's relevant so they connect with it. I think it's a great example that you use here, describing the needs of ELLs. John Wright writes, students are too often not able to respond to best practices based on their own beliefs, abilities, and behavioral frame of mind at the time of the teaching practice. Great comment there, John, and I want you to remember this, the comment you just made there. When we look at a graph later on, an illustration that I use to try to illustrate what a personalized learning environment looks like, it's very relevant what you say there. And then Delia says, yes, when you are following best practice, that is not fit for the area in which you are teaching, or low socioeconomic, etc. Thank you all very much for participating in this. So as we talk about equitable practice today, I'm going to present an argument to you that personalized learning is the implementation of equitable school practice. And so I'm going to give a few examples as we go through this. Now this happens to be my family on the screen here. So my son Dominic on the left, my wife Melody, myself, and then my daughter Maya. And at this time, Maya, I believe, was 5 in this photo. Dom would have been 9. They are now 11 and 7. You can see they are 2 beautiful kids, and they have a lot of life in them, let alone the fact Dom needs a haircut there, but that's another issue. So what I'm going to show you is actually taken from Dominic's 4th grade experience. So Dominic tends to be a more introverted learner. He does a lot of deep reflection. He's not the quickest kid in the room to raise his hand, to want to talk, and give the answers. But he can really get into a particular topic and study it and get to know it. And so the following slides are actually from a 4th grade project. And so once a month, this 4th grade teacher would have the students choose a project on their own. So most of the month, it was fairly rote learning. And you know, a lot of homework, a lot of worksheet-based homework each night. And it was tough to get through. It was a tough year for us as parents to be pushing him, you know, every single night through a lot of worksheet-based homework. But then once a month, he got to choose his project. And so this particular project is his rocket project. He has this little rocket that uses vinegar and baking soda to take off. And it just completely enamored him. He got so wrapped up in this project. So there he is making his rocket, and these are all PowerPoint slides that he built for his class presentation. Loading the dry fuel, which was the baking soda, loading the liquid fuel, which is the vinegar. And then I hope this video plays appropriately or plays right on the webinar. But I'm going to go ahead and play this because this is his, in a sense, his performance assessment. This is authentic performance to this project of the rocket. So I'm going to hit play. Of course, you can hear my voice there. Another try.
Together. You gotta push hard together, all the way down in. Yep. Pull, push it. So hard on. Gotta shake. Oh.
Okay, so we keep trying. We're both getting sprayed.
Put it together.
Try it again. Try more baking soda this time.
Even if it's okay, now set it down. Okay.
Failure again. But if you notice, he tries it again, and he tries it again, and he tries it again. I don't know, a little bit of flight there.
Face hard on the plastic. Let it go.
So my opinion there as a parent is we finally got it to fly. His thought was it was supposed to fly really high. So he insisted on continuing to try this out. We're to about number 11 or 12 here. You can notice it's now getting dark. He won't give up. Now we're doing it together. It's bedtime by this point. He will not give up. And it's still not working. And finally, at about 8 p.m., barely enough light to still videotape this, it takes off. And if you notice, when it finally takes off, the vinegar shoots out, lands in his eye, and he ends up rolling away in pain while celebrating the fact that the rocket actually launched. So I love using this example because you can see in Dominic, because this project was his choice, it was personalized to his interest, he would not give up. He kept trying and trying and trying to figure out how can he get this rocket to launch. And that's really the power of personalized learning. Equitable and an equitable educational experience is deeply about that student and his or her needs. So as we look at this, equity is personalized learning. So just a quick moment for reflection here. Is equitable teaching practice equal for all kids? Send in your responses. I'd love to hear you play on this term of equitable and equal. Is equitable teaching practice equal for all kids? And some of you were already starting to touch on this in your responses to the previous question. But we have to break this down because there becomes this question, well, I mean, don't equal and equitable share the same root? Aren't they basically pointing towards the same thing? Anna writes in and says, Anna, his response said, no, not all kids need the same equal instruction. That's exactly right. Jason says, no, sir, not everybody loves launching rocket ships by the pool. You're right, Jason. Some kids may have very different interests. It's not the interest that we're trying to teach to, it's the skills we're trying to teach to, but we use the interest to engage the students in the development of the school. So an equitable teaching practice is recognizing that we may expect equal outcomes for the students, but our inputs, how it is that we're supporting that student each day in the classroom, that's where we start to see shifts. Karen says, nope, equity is fair, equal is same. Sam says, no, equitable means each gets what they need, while equal means the same for all. So let's keep building out this argument. What is equitable practice? Can diverse 21st century students learn with 20th century teaching methods? The teaching norm has long been focused on serving homogeneous students growing up in cultures where similarity was the norm. Our current student body, however, embodies difference as the new 21st century norm. This is where we come into direct conflict with the experience of our teaching core. So just to lay this out a bit, the reality is most teachers become professional educators because they somehow connected with school. School worked for them. In all my years of doing this, when I and these are very non-scientific polls, but when I ask groups, how many of you enjoyed school while you were growing up? Typically 90% of the audience of educators will say that they more or less connected with schools, they enjoyed it. So a very small percentage of teachers are entering the field because they did not like the experience. They're trying to create a different experience for their students. What this means is that teachers tend to show up in the classroom already biased to the experience of traditional education. It worked for the teacher, so there's an inherent bias that it's also going to work for the students. I think of my own experience. I was the same culturally, racially, religious, religion, socioeconomics, all the rest, as at least 90% or more of my teachers. Both my parents were teachers. I was the third in my family to be an honors student at my high school. So when I came in, my expectation was for a very homogenous experience. I did very well in school. School is made for me to succeed. And so I have this inherent bias towards a traditional education working because it worked for me. But now as I think about students, as I think about Dominic, difference is the fundamental norm now, which means kids are not coming in with an expectation that they go along with what the teacher delivers and thus they'll have a good educational experience. The world has shifted around them in ways that few of us have experienced. Kids have access to knowledge and to learning and to engagement at their fingertips unlike ever before. And so a student comes in with an expectation that learning is somehow going to be tailored to his or her needs. But the teacher comes in with an expectation that they're going to deliver a great experience for all the students. So we have to start breaking this down. So as we look at this, I would love to know, what role does equity play in the teaching and learning in your school system? in your school or school system. So take a moment to reflect on this. How deliberate are the concepts of equity incorporated into the teaching and learning that occurs in your school? Not just into the discussions that happen in school, not just the culture, but what role does equity play in the teaching and learning daily of the students? So go ahead and take a moment to respond to this question. While you're writing on this, I do want to share Delia's response to the prior question. We have to teach skills, not interest. We have to allow them to be themselves, not a copycat student choice. Absolutely. I really like that the way you phrase that, Delia. Teaching skills, not interest. Now, interest is an avenue of student engagement. But within that interest, the student is mastering a wide diversity of skills. And so if you think about Dominic's experience with the rocket, well, what are the skills he's looking? He's looking at the scientific method. He's building a hypothesis. He's continuing to engineer his solution. There's all these skills that he's practicing within his interest of rocket ships. So, but again, what role does equity play in the teaching and learning that's going on in your schools? So Sam says that she doesn't work directly in a school system. I know Sam is working out the university system in North Carolina, but equity is fully at the core of the teaching and learning that she's doing with states, districts, and schools. Anna says it depends on the teacher. We have teachers who consistently plan for all their students' learning, maintaining high expectations while supporting each student in their needs for meeting those expectations. We have others who are not as culturally aware. So kind of a mixed bag situation, which Anna is very typical. But I think it's worth this reflection to say how many of the teachers are really thinking on this. And it's interesting that the way you describe equity is teachers who consistently plan for all their students' learning. So you're really looking at this from a front-loaded perspective. Teachers who are deliberately saying, I have 30 kids in my classroom, how is it that my teaching is planned so that all these students are going to be engaged? And I like how you took it there to almost the pre-portion of the learning. So as you reflect on this, to just give you a little background, why is it that I'm here speaking about this? So at School Improvement Network, for 25 years now, we have been looking at this question: how can we make 100% happen in the classroom? And when we talk about 100%, what we mean is 100% of students learning and progressing. Does that mean 100% of students every single year at grade level? Not exactly. But are we seeing environments where 100% of students are persistently engaged and growing at acceptable levels, succeeding academically more and more each year? So that's really, it's been our 25-year quest to find those schools that do this and feature them and learn from them. So as we've moved through this, the resource that we provided to support other schools in copying, really these successful practices from these highly engaging schools is Edivate. Edivate is made up of a large library of these examples of teaching practices of teachers who succeed with kids every day. And honestly, this conversation has to be framed around this idea of 100% of our students being prepared for college, career, lifelong success. So as we move through this, as we've been working on this over the years, what I want to present to you is this equitable school success formula. As you think about how is it that you get this equity to actually work at the school level, well, the goal is actual equity, as we've been talking about, that equitable classroom environment for each and every student. So what are the components that go into that? Well, personalized learning, cultural proficiency, and successful implementation. So in the previous two webinars, we talked about leadership with successful implementation. We talked about cultural proficiency, cultural relevancy in the last webinar. And today we're really focusing in on this point of personalized learning. Again, I'm making the argument that personalized learning is where the rubber hits the road in terms of equity in the classroom. Because if we define out equity, so what is equity? Well, this is the definition that we've put forth. Equity is when educators provide all students with the individual support they need to reach and exceed a common standard. So as we break this down, equity, educators provide. So the responsibility of an equitable school environment is solely upon the shoulders of the educators. Providing all students, each and every student is included in this with the individual support they need. So equity is about a collective success built through individualized support of each student, much like you were saying in your reflections. You know, when Anna, when you talked about those teachers who are consistently planning for all their students' learning, thinking about them each individually, but supporting those students so that they can reach and exceed a common standard. Equity is about the outcome. It's about achieving some equality of performance at the exit of school rather than assuming an equal entrance at the beginning of school. So as we look at this, my area of work over the last several years has been looking at this equity framework. And the equity framework came about by spending a lot of time in these schools that had achieved very equitable outcomes for their students. You know, the test scores showed it, the qualitative, the parent surveys, discipline rates, all the rest showed that these were schools that were highly engaging where all students were succeeding. We spent a lot of time in these schools documenting you know, how they approached the daily education of their students. From that, we created the equity framework. And so the equity framework represents these common beliefs and practices and approaches of these equitable school environments. Like I said, two webinars ago, we focused in on leadership. The last one was focused on school culture. Today, we're really looking at teaching and learning. And so teaching and learning, some of the considerations in this, how are you making the curriculum more equitable for students? This is where some of those interests and whatnot come into play. The teaching skills on the part of the teacher. What skills is the teacher bringing to bear on a day-by-day basis so that the teacher can modify that learning experience based upon the context, the immediate needs of that student? Assessment. How are we accomplishing more authentic assessments so that, as one of you had referenced, we're looking at the skills that students are applying as a result of their learning. We're really measuring more the skills because the skills is what they walk out the door with. And so, yes, tests can show acquisition of knowledge, but if that knowledge can't be applied, you know, the skill side of it, then the student may not be prepared when they leave school and enter the workforce or enter college, whatever it may be. And then also interventions is a strong consideration here. How are the interventions equitable for all students? Now, this is one that gets tricky because too often in traditional environment, our interventions have been punitive. They've put students into a group and held that student in the group. And so the intervention which is designed to help the student succeed, in the end, actually tends to hold them down. So how are our interventions designed to be responsive to the individual and present need of the student? So those are the considerations on this practice side of equity. One of the video links that I will send to you after this webinar is over, actually it will come from David Black, is a video on Griffin High School in Griffin, Georgia. Now, this is a school, and just to give a little background on it, because I think it's a great example to watch of a highly equitable environment. So, so at Griffin High School, this was a school that was basically in failing status in Georgia, highly diverse environment. And they embarked on a process over the course of 5 years to radically turn around the success of their school. And they did it through this daily engagement of the students. Now, it wasn't just daily engagement in the academic courses. They did an immense amount of work with their sports teams, their, you know, the band, the ROTC, all these different experiences to get students sold on the value of Griffin High School to their life. And so it's a beautiful example. I do hope you will watch it when when David sends out the link after this webinar. So actual equity is true readiness for college, career, and society, a goal that all students deserve to attain, that we are responsible for facilitating. So if equity is educators providing individualized support for each and every student, actual equity is when we see students leaving school ready for college, career, and beyond. So personalized learning. Now to dive into personalized learning, let's start thinking about what this looks like on a daily experience for the student. So personalized learning begins with the student's own readiness, interests, pace, and mastery, and then progresses rapidly forward. So personalized learning is not entirely about just allowing students to do whatever they want. It's not, it's not freedom from control of learning, but it's learning which is oriented towards the interests, the needs, the readiness levels, the learning styles of that particular student. And by allowing a student to learn right where they are ready, where their readiness is, in the way that works best for them, that's where we see the most rapid progress. So what does personalized learning look like? Well, I've got to step back a bit and remind us of what a standards-based teaching approach looks like in kind of in contrast to a personalized experience. So over the last decade or two, we've become very proficient at shifting the mindset towards this standards-based teaching approach. Teacher looks at a standard, thinks about the curriculum that they can deliver, delivers that curriculum or that learning to the student, and then assesses the student's progress in relation to that standard. When we shift this towards a student-centered approach or a personalized approach, what we first analyze, instead of analyzing the standards, we actually analyze the student. So we determine where each and every student is. What is their readiness level? What are they ready? They may be in 5th grade, but they're only ready to learn 3rd grade level math. Okay, that is the student's readiness level. Once we understand where the student is, then we have to consider, well, what are the standards and proficiencies that the student needs to achieve? So in a personalized or student-centered environment, we're not forgetting about the standards. We are highly aware of the standards of achievement that the student needs to perform to, but we're thinking about the standards in relation to the student rather than the student in relation to the standard. So that's the first piece. We also have to consider, what are the skills that the teacher brings to this experience? And so if I know the particular student, let's take Dominic, my son, for example. He's more introverted. Okay, so I need a teacher who's going to understand how a more quiet person processes learning. We have to think about the skill set of the teacher in relation to the student, rather than just thinking about how will the student relate to the teacher. Then we come down to culture and relevancy. This was one of the things we discussed in the last webinar. So if I am understanding who the student is, who is the student culturally? Where do they come from? What's their neighborhood like? What's their family structure like? What values does the family hold? What values, what things does that student's home culture celebrate? Well, I need to investigate these things because all of these things give me clues as to how to highly engage the student. So if I'm planning out the learning experience or the lesson and not thinking about who is the student, where do they come from, I'm missing a massive opportunity to heighten engagement on the part of the student. If the student steps into the learning and what the student sees is a learning that reflects who they are, you double and triple engagement off the bat. And so this is one of the major tools that we have not taken time to do within education. But in this more personalized environment, we have to. Because if you only think about the student in relation to the standards, well, I'm going to allow students to kind of move through the standards at their own pace. But you're not reflecting this need for understanding the student's culture, well, we're missing a massive opportunity. And that brings us to the choice and accountability. When I am designing the learning in response to who the student is and what the student needs, then I'm naturally giving opportunities for choice to the student. Go back to Dominic with that rocket. He chose the rocket. Jason had made a comment about, not everyone's interested in rockets. Jason's right. But since Dominic has that interest in rockets, made the choice to do his project on rockets, Dominic was not going to give up on that rocket until it succeeded at flying. And so as you think about this accountability piece in a personalized learning environment, no one had to hold Dominic accountable for his learning with that rocket. Because he had chosen it, it was his interest, his drive, he held himself accountable. Well, that's where you get the best learning. When students are holding themselves accountable to learning, that's when they thrive, because it matters to them. It means something to them. So, forgive me for taking a bit of time to go through this illustration, but I think it's really important as we consider these learning environments that students need to be placed in. The ways we need to evolve our schools so that they are more personalized for each and every student. And I'm going back to the comment from John Wright. John, you had written earlier, students are too often not able to respond to best practices based on their own beliefs, abilities, and behavioral frame of mind at the time of the teaching practice. So when I read your comment, I thought about this graphic, and the reason why is that what you described there is where the teacher is thinking about, how am I going to deliver this? And then hoping the students will respond. In this more personalized or student-centered environment, the teacher is now implementing or applying skills and practices to engage the student based on who the student is and what the student's interests are. And so it reverses this equation. You begin with an understanding of the student, and then you deliver the learning. Instead of delivering the learning, seeing how the student responds, and then circling back to provide interventions. I hope this makes sense. And I encourage you to to send me questions and whatnot, because yes, it's a little abstract here, but when you see this applied in the classroom, absolute magic happens. This is another example of Dominic, and I think it's a great way to describe how students engage today. So here he is playing Angry Birds. And this is his own interest. This is what he wants to do. But think about, in playing this game, and sorry, you can hear my daughter, who was very young at the time, in the background. So that's just Maya talking. She's a very social girl, and we love her dearly for it. So but as you watch Dominic do this, 3 characteristics are in play while he engages in this video game. The first one is mastery. So he intuitively knows as he looks at this, well, mastery is, in Angry Birds, when you knock down all the towers, when you basically have destroyed all the Angry Birds. And so he will do this again and again and again until he achieves mastery at each level. But this isn't on my timeline, it's on his timeline. It's self-paced. So Dominic is driving himself to mastery in his own time frame. It's not me saying you have 30 seconds or you have 30 minutes to prove that you can master this level. It's Dominic looking at it, pacing himself. How many levels of mastery do I want to achieve? And the third component of this, and this is how kids engage today, they embrace practice. And so failure is a complete option in this scenario. It's Dominic who again and again and again will practice this particular level until he masters it. And so personalized learning incorporates into that learning environment mastery, self-paced, and practice. Well, those 3 things all give ownership of the learning to the student. I've always loved this illustration of him playing this video game for that very purpose, because he's hyper-engaged, focused on achieving mastery. So when we're in a school environment or in a classroom environment, there are 4 characteristics that I want you to consider. How do you actually build out this personalized learning experience for the student? 4 components on this. Think about this in the classroom. The first component is planning, and I appreciate one of you who had talked about those teachers who are planning for the needs of each and every student. So you can think about planning, you're kind of boxing in the learning. What is the what is the range of learning that we're going to explore today? So I've laid out my plan. The second piece of personalized learning is learn. So plan out what's going to happen in the classroom. Now engage them in the learning. Well, the learning is where students are building additional knowledge towards some level of proficiency. And so you're providing lots of different avenues for them to explore and to learn. But learning turns into practice. Remember, we're focusing on the development of skills, not just the memorization of knowledge here. And so practice needs to be unlimited. And I think this is one place where we have, traditional education has really destroyed the opportunity for equitable education for all students. We limit the practice time. When students are free to practice something again and again and again, what do they ultimately achieve? Well, they achieve that ability to apply the learning or to master it. And so personalized learning in the classroom on a day-by-day basis, the teacher is laying out a plan, communicating that plan with the student, that is in recognition of the student's needs and interests and all the rest. Providing many different resources so that students can learn what it is they're working on. But most important, allowing time for practice. Remember Dominic playing that video game? He kept failing. Well, that's practice. You need to let a student apply and apply and apply again until they start to master it. And when they master the skill, well, that is now, that's a skill that will go forward with the student. So plan, learn, practice, apply as 4 critical components that have to exist within this equitable classroom environment. So this is just an illustration of a school that I spent a good deal of time at. This was Nolan Middle School. This was in Detroit. And so what Nolan had created was a middle school hub. And so a general age range of students were in a large classroom where they could do independent work, they could do group work, they were really given that practice time. But at certain times of the day, based upon the student's readiness level, certain students would be pulled out who shared a similar readiness level into a math seminar. At the same time, other students would be pulled into an ELA seminar, an English Language Arts seminar. And so the students weren't leveled in the sense where they had one period where they went to a particular class where all the kids were taught that. Each day they were pulled out into these seminars based upon their current needs. And in the seminars is where the teacher could provide more focused, small group instruction based on the readiness levels of that small group of students. And so the students would go in and out of these groupings all day long, every day, constantly going back and forth between this focus time with a teacher who's particularly skilled in the subject and more open time in the hub where they were allowed to do group work, individual work, all the rest. So Nolan took the time I spent at Nolan was 2 years watching them develop this over 2 years. In that time, what's remarkable, by the end of the second year, they were seeing their middle school students, 83% of their middle school students experiencing 2 years of academic growth for every calendar school year. Now think about that. 83% of the students experiencing more than 2 years of academic growth. This is the power of personalized learning. Now this Nolan, it was a very inner city school. I mean, this is Detroit as we understand it. These were students, all who had come in far below grade level, with the standardized assessments. But because of this personalized environment that Nolan built out, 83% of the kids were experiencing more than 2 years of growth. 95% of the kids were experiencing at least 1 year's worth of growth. So 95% of the kids experiencing acceptable growth, which allowed the school to really focus in on that last 5% and figure out what's going on, how do they need to provide more support there. It's just an awesome, awesome example to witness over time. And they very much had applied this plan, learn, practice, apply approach to the classroom experience for the students. So going back to this equitable school success formula, personalized learning plus cultural proficiency plus successful implementation leads to actual equity. So I want to throw a poll out to you. so that I can see how you all respond to really evidence that you're seeing around equitable teaching practice. So if you go down to the poll tool, if you'll see on that GoToWebinar control panel, it says polls. Open it up and, oh, sorry, I thought the poll was set up. Never mind on this. So actually in your...
I haven't set that up yet.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right, Dave. So in the question box, I want you to take one of these questions, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and take a moment to reflect on it. So, and the reason why you want you to focus on one is I really want you to think about, you know, in my school or school system, is curriculum engaging for all students? Or is it relevant? Or is it applicable? Or is it purposeful? So take a moment and reflect on these 4 characteristics: engaging, relevant, applicable, and purposeful. Think about your curriculum. What is it the students are learning each day? Is it engaging? Is it relevant? Is it applicable? Is it purposeful? I do have all students in here, and if you want, you can kind of delineate and say, you know, for some students it is this, but take a moment to reflect on this. And even though John had to leave us, I love that John shared in the question box that what we're talking about validates what he's been doing for 40 years. It's a beautiful thing to hear. And as I see your responses come in, I will share them with the group. Anna here says that different content area curricula would score differently on this poll.
I've created a quick poll that should be up there for you, Curtis.
Great.
And
great. So as so as you finish reflecting, go ahead and complete that poll. I'd love to see the different responses. So I'm just going to share a bit of the reflections that came in. So Anna said the different content area curricula would score differently on this poll. In general, our curricula does not meet these criteria for all students. However, teachers can teach their curriculum in such a way to meet these criteria, particularly when they have a skill-based curriculum. Anna, thanks for going back to that skill-based part. I agree with you. It's an incredibly important component of this. Alexandra says, in my school system, curriculum is engaging for all students. We have different clubs where students can develop their skills and talents. And that's an interesting approach as well, Alexandra. Using clubs to give students these places of hyper engagement, mutual interest clubs. It's a great approach. Sam says, in the places where I work, I find the answer to each of these 4 questions would be no, especially for young learners, as teachers struggle with the idea of application. Many students believe the reason they are learning content is to pass an assessment, not because it has value in their world and their lives. And Sam, with that comment, I mean, you have gone straight to the heart of so much of our challenge. Students don't show up to school just to take a test. Well, they do. But the dream of an education is to be able to leave school with these skills that you can really apply. And when so much of the focus and the pressure, I mean, think about this, when the stress of school is focused around the assessments, then there's no room for the stress of school to be focused on the development of the skills. But what's interesting, and I've witnessed this in a number of different schools, when they really shift this to this emphasis of skill and application and what you're going to do with the learning, the assessments kind of take care of themselves. And again, I've seen schools say, when we de-emphasize the stress around the annual assessments, we focused on the true learning and application, for the students, test scores go up. Why? Because students, understand this learning really matters for me. Delia says, I would have to say that the conversation from the head is engaging, relevant, applicable, and purposeful for all students. However, the roles change from teacher to teacher. Some are more purposeful than engaging. So I appreciate you all for responding on this. And as you look at the poll, is the curriculum engaging, relevant, applicable, purposeful? 57% you say engaging, 14% applicable, 29% purposeful. It's actually kind of interesting when you think about it. I think to some degree, a lot of our professional development has been focused on developing those strategies that heighten engagement on the part of the student. But if that is done at the expense of the purposefulness or the applicability of the learning, well, I think that's something we may need to find some balance with. So I'm going to go back to the presentation here. We are just about out of time, so I really appreciate y'all hanging with me through this. So as we look at this, I just want to bring this quote. I shared this in the last webinar, but I think it's so relevant to our discussion today. And this is from Jamie Almanzon, a close friend and colleague. Culture is the foundation of pedagogy. You teach who you are. And so what's requisite upon us as educators when we think about what it is that we bring to the classroom, first and foremost, we have to recognize we are bringing our own experiences. We're bringing our own biases. We're bringing our own way of how to learn and what we prefer in terms of engaging with the learning. But the challenge is, it's not us who needs to learn in the classroom, it's the students. And so the more and more we become aware of who we are and what we bring to the classroom, the more we can be honest about how it is we can modify that learning experience so it is deeply responsive to that student on a daily basis. So as we think about building these practical classrooms, they're equitable. I want you to go home today really thinking about expectations, rigor, and relationships. And so we've talked about these different ways of orienting the learning, thinking about student-centered or personalizing it. But if we personalize learning and we lower our expectations in the process, we've now created another inequitable problem for students. So the challenge here is to personalize the learning but maintain the high level of expectations. Again, thinking about when the student goes out to the world, they need a certain set of skills. So we've got to hold that high expectation. Rigor, again, personalized learning. If we implement personalized learning, but we de-emphasize rigor, we don't present enough challenge to the student, well, now we're letting them to almost engage in a hobby versus requiring them to do quality work. And so the quality or the rigor of the learning has to be present in a personalized learning environment in order to maintain its equitable nature. And finally, relationships. So expectations, rigor, and relationships. Personalized learning is not learning alone. That collaborative structure, the relationship between the teacher and the student, the relationship between the student and others, those relationships are key to learning. I was actually just going through some research today that Michael Pullen has been doing around highly successful school systems. And his overwhelmingly strong conclusion is that it is within those collaborative structures where we see the most gains in student learning. So expectations, rigor, and relationship is kind of these key things to, these quality metrics in a sense to make sure are applied in a personalized learning environment. So to close, I want to bring us back to this definition of equity. What is equity? Educators provide all students with the individual support they need to reach and exceed a common standard. And pulling us back to this original question that was posed, can diverse 21st century students learn with 20th century teaching methods? The teaching norm has long been focused on serving homogeneous students growing up in cultures where similarity was the norm. Our current student body, however, embodies difference as the new 21st century norm. And so just to end with a photo of, these two kids that I spend every day with, as I think about them and I think about the way they engage with their learning, when learning is personalized to their needs, they respond, and I see this. Dominic is in a middle school now that's highly responsive to his personalized needs. He is thriving like I've never seen him thrive. But that is due to this learning environment that his school has created that is highly equitable for all the students involved. So I'm going to hang on for a bit and and to take your questions. So please pose your questions. You've been with me for an hour, and I really appreciate this time that you've given to our conversation. And so I'll hang on for a couple more moments to answer any questions you have, and I really appreciate this time that you've given us today.
Thank you, Curtis. I just want to point out we do have one more poll talking about this webinar in particular. We want to improve our webinars as we go, and so your input is very valued. So if you don't mind clicking the button and letting us know how this webinar met your expectations.
And I do want to share the comment that Sam wrote in. She said, whenever these four things are put into place, a school transforms from being low performing to high performing. You've seen it, I've seen it. These are the elements that make all the difference. I appreciate that, Sam, and I completely agree.
So if there are any questions, please feel free to write them in the questions box and we will answer them.